The storm had been relentless that night, waves thrashing like wild beasts, tearing at the hull of the small yacht. Daniel Mercer clung to the rail as thunder split the black sky in half. The storm swallowed everything: sound, light, and reason. Then came the blinding flash, the deafening crack, and silence. When he opened his eyes, everything was white. A steady hum filled the air, rhythmic beeping, the scent of antiseptic. A hospital. He blinked, trying to focus, but his body refused to move. Bandages wrapped around his head and shoulder, and an IV line snaked from his arm. Where am I? His voice came out hoarse, foreign. A nurse appeared, Asian, young, kind eyes. "You're in Seoul. You were found unconscious near the coast. Shipwreck. You've been in a coma for 6 weeks." 6 weeks. The words hung like fog. His memories rushed in pieces: the storm, the crash, the sharp pain as he was thrown into the dark sea. Then nothing. He tried to move again, but his body trembled under the weight of weakness. "Do you have someone we can contact?" the nurse asked softly. Daniel hesitated. His wife? His brother? His company? His empire? Yes, there were people. Too many, perhaps, but something deep in his gut urged caution. "Not yet," he whispered. "Please, not yet." Over the next days, fragments of his life returned like shards of glass. Daniel Mercer, 42. CEO of Mercer Holdings, an empire of tech and real estate. Married to Evelyn, elegant, poised, cold as marble. His younger brother, Charles, ran the financial branch. Together, they'd built something that could last generations. But something about that night at sea clawed at him. The storm had been real, yes, but the explosion, that sudden flash before the crash, it wasn't lightning. It was sabotage. He could still see it, the burst of orange near the engine room, the metallic taste of smoke, the way the fire spread impossibly fast. Someone wanted him dead. A month passed before he could walk again. The doctors called him a miracle. He called it survival. When he finally looked in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. The beard, the scars, the hollow eyes. A stranger stared back. He took the name David Merton, a small change that could pass unnoticed, and he decided not to call home. Not yet. He needed to know what he was returning to. Late one night, in the small hospital library, he accessed the internet for the first time since the accident. His heart pounded as he typed, "Daniel Mercer, death." The screen filled with headlines. Billionaire Daniel Mercer presumed dead in boating accident. Memorial service held for Mercer CEO. Widow Evelyn Mercer to lead company amid tragedy. He stared, unblinking. The words blurred. Presumed dead. Widow. Tragedy? A news clip played automatically, a video from the memorial. Evelyn, dressed in black, stood beside Charles, her face perfectly composed, tears falling at all the right moments. But what froze Daniel wasn't her performance. It was the look Charles gave her. Subtle. Intimate. A look that didn't belong between siblings-in-law. His chest tightened. The camera lingered on them, Charles's hand brushing hers for a second too long. Daniel leaned back, jaw clenched. They hadn't just accepted his death. They had planned it. He dug deeper, Board decisions, company transitions, trust funds. Within weeks of his death, Charles had been promoted to interim CEO, while Evelyn controlled 60% of his personal shares. His will, somehow, had been executed immediately. His assets, homes, art, offshore accounts were all liquidated under Evelyn's authorization. Every trace of him was erased. That night, under the cold light of the hospital corridor, Daniel Mercer, now David Merton, made a vow. He would not announce his return. Not yet. He would watch, wait, and find the truth. 2 weeks later, he discharged himself from the hospital. The doctors tried to dissuade him, but his mind was set. He left with only a passport issued under his new name, a small bag, and a body still aching from the sea's punishment. In a quiet cafe across from Seoul Station, Daniel watched the rain again. But this time, it wasn't fear he felt. It was calculation. He booked a flight to Prague, where one of Mercer Holdings' shell companies operated. From there, he could access restricted data without alerting anyone back home. On the plane, he stared out the window, remembering the last conversation he'd had with Evelyn before the accident. "You're too trusting," she said, sipping her wine. "Not everyone around you wants what's best for you." He smiled then, thinking she meant Charles. Now he knew she had been warning him about herself. Prague was cold and gray when he arrived. Using his contacts in the underworld of data recovery, Daniel located a hacker known as Sable, a woman he specialized in financial forensics and digital ghosts. For a price, she agreed to dig into Mercer Holdings' files. 3 nights later, she met him in a dim apartment above a bar, eyes sharp behind black glasses. "You were right," she said, handing him a flash drive. "Massive data transfers, offshore accounts under names tied to your wife and brother. It's clean work, professional. But there's something else." She opened her laptop. A series of emails appeared, encrypted, time-stamped before the accident. One from Evelyn to Charles. "Everything is ready. Once the signal is given, no turning back." Another from Charles to a contact in Singapore. "Ensure the engine fails mid-sea. No survivors." Daniel felt the world tilt. He gripped the table to steady himself. "Do you want to go to the authorities?" Sable asked quietly. He shook his head. "No. Not yet." His voice was low, almost a growl. "They buried me alive. Now I'll let them think I'm still dead, until I decide otherwise." That night, under the cold light of the hospital corridor, Daniel Mercer, now David Merton, planned his resurrection. Daniel Mercer had once been a man who believed in order, in numbers and contracts, in the unshakable logic of business. Now he believed in ghosts, his own most of all. Under his new identity, David Merton, he returned to New York like a shadow. The city felt different, colder, hungrier. He moved through it unnoticed, an invisible man haunting the ruins of his old life. His first stop was the Mercer Tower, the headquarters he'd built from scratch. The glass facade loomed over the street like an altar to ambition. Inside, guards in black uniforms stood where once familiar faces had greeted him. A new security system, a new logo. Evelyn and Charles had wasted no time reshaping everything. He watched from across the street, sipping cheap coffee. His reflection in the window looked like any other tired businessman. Gray coat, tired eyes, a scar across his temple that refused to fade. From his pocket, he took out a small listening device, one of Sable's creations. Tiny, powerful, untraceable. He would need access inside. That chance came sooner than he expected. Across the street, an employee exited the tower, distractedly speaking into her phone, badge swinging from her neck. Daniel followed her to the subway, noting the security pattern on her ID. The next day, he was in line at a print shop with the same pattern loaded onto a fake badge. By nightfall, he was inside Mercer Tower, disguised as a maintenance contractor. He took the elevator to the 32nd floor, Charles's domain. Every sound echoed in the polished marble corridors. The air smelled of cedar and power. He found Charles's office door slightly ajar. Inside, the desk was a battlefield of contracts and whiskey stains. Daniel moved like a ghost, sliding the listening device beneath the desk. His fingers brushed a photo frame, Charles and Evelyn at a gala, smiling like a royal couple. His pulse pounded. He slipped out before anyone saw him. Over the next week, the bugs picked up hours of conversations. At night, Daniel sat in a dingy motel room, headphones pressed to his ears, listening to the voices of the people who had buried him. "The board meeting's next week," Charles was saying one evening. "Once the merger's done, we transfer the rest of the funds to Zurich. No loose ends." Evelyn's voice answered, calm and cold. "And if anyone starts asking questions about Daniel's estate..." Charles laughed softly. "Who? The dead man himself?" Daniel's jaw tightened until it hurt. He listened to them plot, scheme, and celebrate the life they had stolen. It became his fuel. But one night, a new voice entered the conversation. A man he didn't recognize. Rough accent, Eastern European. "Payment for the job wasn't complete. We handled your problem at sea. Now you handle ours." Daniel froze. The job, the explosion, the storm hadn't been an accident. It had been executed by professionals. Charles's tone grew sharp. "You'll get what you were promised, but you come near her again and you'll regret it." Evelyn spoke next, softer. "We can't have any witnesses." Then the recording ended. For a long time, Daniel sat in silence, the hum of the city leaking through the walls. He always thought of revenge as an emotion, hot, consuming, chaotic. But this was different. This was cold, methodical. The next morning, he sent a coded message to Sable. "Find the man from the call. Trace the number." By nightfall, she replied with a name, Mikhail Orlov, a known fixer who'd done accident cleanups for corporate clients, last seen in Budapest. Daniel booked a flight without hesitation. In Budapest, he found Orlov in a basement bar, thick with smoke and silence. The man was built like a tank, scars crossing his knuckles. When Daniel walked in, Orlov looked up, and his eyes widened. "You," he began, but Daniel had already drawn a small pistol from his coat, the kind that made no sound but told every truth. "Sit," Daniel said quietly. "You're going to tell me everything." Orlov's gaze flickered between fear and disbelief. "You're supposed to be dead." "Clearly, I'm not." "Start talking." The man swallowed hard. "It was your brother. He came to me with blueprints of your yacht, paid half up front, half after confirmation, said you'd gone missing in a storm before the explosion. Your wife approved the final transfer." "Where?" "Singapore accounts, offshore." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And the people who helped you?" Orlov hesitated. Daniel leaned closer, voice low and lethal. "If I disappear, others will come. You don't want that." The man broke. "It was a mechanic in your company, Julian Price. He installed the failsafe. He's still there." Daniel left without another word. Back in New York, he tracked Julian's address, a modest apartment in Queens. He waited outside until the man returned from work, tired and unaware that the dead had come to visit. When Daniel confronted him, Julian's face drained of color. "Mr. Mercer, sir, I swear I didn't know it was you they were killing. They said it was an insurance job, just to disable the yacht." Daniel stared at him, voice steady but cold. "You wired the charge. You signed my death." Julian dropped to his knees. "They threatened my family. I didn't have a choice." For a moment, Daniel wanted to pull the trigger, to end it there. But then he saw the fear in the man's eyes, the same fear that had once made Daniel ignore his own instincts. He lowered the gun. "Then you'll help me bring them down." Julian nodded, trembling. "Anything you need." They spent the next week gathering evidence. Emails, secret accounts, offshore transfers. Every document was another nail in the coffin of Evelyn and Charles.
One night, Daniel broke into his old home. The mansion stood silent, draped in false luxury. In the study, he found Evelyn's new portrait hanging where his used to be. Her eyes, painted in oil and arrogance, followed him through the room. He opened her desk drawer and found a folder labeled Estate Closure. Inside, signed documents, witness statements, even his death certificate. His signature had been forged perfectly. But what stopped him cold was a photograph tucked at the back. Evelyn and Charles together in bed, smiling. The timestamp was 2 months before the accident. For a long moment, Daniel couldn't breathe. Then, carefully, he folded the photo and slipped it into his pocket. Proof, not of betrayal, but of motive. Outside, thunder rolled again over the city. By the end of the month, Daniel had everything: evidence, witnesses, and leverage. But he didn't want to simply expose them. No, he wanted them to feel what he had felt: the shock, the loss, the slow suffocation of realizing everything was gone. And so he planned something more elegant. The upcoming Mercer Gala, a grand charity event broadcast live to investors and press, would mark the official announcement of the merger company, a merger built on his stolen empire. Evelyn and Charles would be on stage, smiling for cameras, pretending to be philanthropists while drowning in lies. Daniel would be there too, uninvited, unseen, until the moment the truth erupted. The dead man would finally come home.
The night of the Mercer Gala arrived beneath a sky heavy with rain. The city glittered like broken glass, the streets slick with reflections of power and greed. Inside the Grand Royal Hotel, the ballroom pulsed with laughter, champagne, and the sound of money changing hands in whispers. Evelyn Mercer stood near the stage, radiant in a silver gown. Her beauty was as cold as the diamonds around her neck. Cameras flashed, journalists swarmed, and at her side stood Charles. Sharp tuxedo, easy smile, the charm of a man who believed the world was his. "Tonight marks a new era for Mercer Holdings," Charles announced into the microphone, voice echoing through the marble hall. "An era built on vision and legacy." Evelyn smiled for the cameras, the perfect widow turned empire queen. But in the far corner of the room, unseen behind the glow of the chandeliers, stood Daniel Mercer. No one recognized him, not with the beard, the scars, the altered hair. He wore a dark suit and silence like armor. Beneath his jacket, a small transmitter rested against his chest. Julian had helped him link it to the hotel's AV system. Sable had ensured the files were loaded. Tonight, everything would end. He watched as Evelyn mingled effortlessly, laughing, her hand brushing Charles's arm with familiarity that made his blood turn to ice. For a moment, he wondered if she ever felt guilt, or if she'd erased him completely, the way she'd erased his signature from his will. When the lights dimmed for the presentation, Daniel moved toward the control booth. The technician inside nodded at him. Julian, nervous but determined. "You sure about this?" Julian whispered. Daniel's voice was calm, almost tender. "They wanted a ghost. Let's give them one." Julian pressed the switch. On the massive LED screen behind the stage, the company's logo flickered, then vanished. The sound of static filled the ballroom. Laughter faded into confusion. Then the first image appeared, a photograph. Daniel Mercer, smiling beside Evelyn at a company event. The crowd murmured. Another image, Daniel's yacht burning in the storm. And then his voice filled the room, deep and alive. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." The crowd froze. Evelyn's glass slipped from her hand, shattering. Charles's face went pale. "My name is Daniel Mercer, the man you buried 6 months ago." Gasps rippled through the hall.
The screen shifted to show documents, bank transfers, emails, everything. Evelyn's authorization signatures, Charles's encrypted messages, offshore accounts, the murder-for-hire emails, every crime exposed in crystal clarity. "While you mourned my death," Daniel's recorded voice said, "my wife and brother celebrated. They divided my assets, forged my will, and paid to ensure I never came back. But I did." The lights snapped on, and there he was, standing at the back of the hall, very much alive. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. Then whispers turned to shouts. Cameras flashed like lightning. "Daniel?" Evelyn's voice trembled, disbelief twisting her face. "It can't be." Charles stepped forward, rage cracking through his composure. "This is impossible. You're dead," Daniel said, walking slowly toward them. His voice carried like thunder. "That's what you wanted, wasn't it?" Security guards hesitated, unsure whether to stop him or salute him. Every eye in the room followed his every step. Evelyn backed away. "Daniel, please, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," he said, stopping in front of her. "You wanted freedom. You wanted the company. You wanted him." He gestured towards Charles, whose face was drenched in sweat. Charles's voice cracked. "You don't have proof." Daniel reached into his pocket and held up a small flash drive. "Proof enough to send you both away for life." The police were already on their way. Sable had ensured the files reached the authorities and the press simultaneously. Chaos erupted in the hall. Reporters shouting, investors storming out, cameras spinning toward the stage as Evelyn's empire collapsed in real time. But Daniel didn't watch the spectacle. His eyes were fixed on Evelyn. "Did you ever love me?" he asked quietly. For the first time, she faltered. "Once," she whispered, "until you became someone I couldn't reach. Everything was about business, about control." Daniel studied her face, the tears, the trembling lips. Maybe there was truth in her words. Maybe, once long ago, there had been love, but what she had done had buried it forever. When the police entered the ballroom, Charles tried to run. They tackled him before he reached the door. Evelyn didn't resist. She just looked at Daniel as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. "I didn't want you dead," she said softly as they led her away. "I just wanted you gone." Daniel stood there as the crowd parted around him, as the flash of cameras turned him into a legend, the man who returned from the dead, the man whose family tried to kill him. But inside, he felt nothing. No victory, no peace. Later that night, after the noise had faded and the city grew still again, Daniel walked alone through Central Park. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy and clean. He sat on a bench watching the lights of skyscrapers shimmer against the wet pavement. Everything he'd built was his again, the company, the fortune, the name, but the life that had filled it was gone. His phone buzzed, a message from Sable. "It's done. The world knows. You're free." He typed back, "Am I?" Then deleted it before sending. He thought of Evelyn, behind bars, perhaps staring at the same rain through a narrow window, of Charles, consumed by the same greed that had destroyed him, of Julian, trying to rebuild what little remained of his own soul, and of himself, a man who had won everything back and lost the only part that mattered. The wind brushed against him, cool and soft. Somewhere nearby, a street musician played a slow tune on a violin. The notes drifted through the park like ghosts. Daniel closed his eyes. For a moment, he let himself remember the man he had been, the dreamer, the builder, the husband, the one who had believed that love could survive ambition. That man was gone now. He stood, straightened his coat, and walked toward the city lights. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stay. The world would write stories about his resurrection, his vengeance, his triumph. But they would never know the truth that Daniel Mercer had died twice. Once in the storm, and again the night he came home.